Oh my goodness. Welcome to True Crime Unleashed. Now, over the last couple of days, we've seen some new docs drop in the Idaho 4 case. One of them was the judge's denial of the alternate perp theory. Now, see, he breaks it down on why he denied this. The state previously moved in the mine seeking to preclude defendant from offering or arguing alternative perpetrator evidence without first satisfying the applicable evidentiary standards in accordance with the court's subsequent order on the motion. Defendant filed his offers of proof and evidence in support, identifying 4 individuals as potential alternate perpetrators. The state objects to the presentation of this evidence at trial, arguing it fails to satisfy the standard under State versus Meister. Defendant conceded at oral argument that at this point his proffer is not sufficient to pursue an alternate perpetrator theory at the outset of trial, but requests latitude in cross-examination of the state's witnesses to try to establish additional evidence to satisfy the Meister standard. Well, for one, Ann Taylor shouldn't have caved so quickly on it. She shouldn't have. She shouldn't have caved so quickly on it. The court concludes that at this time, defendant's alternate perpetrator proffer is inadmissible under Meister, and it is irrelevant and or excluded by IRE 403. However, this does not foreclose defendant from cross-examining law enforcement regarding the reasonableness of its investigation and its follow-up on plausible leads. So Judge Hippler is giving the defense kind of a leeway here when it comes to cross-examination of state's witnesses. Now, will that leeway also go towards the cross-examination of Dylan and Bethany if they're called to the stand? Possibly. I don't know. But at least the judge is giving some leeway for the defense to cross-examine the law enforcement and the state's witnesses to kind of give maybe a hint of an alternate perpetrator. Trial courts have a broad discretion in the admission of evidence at trial. Carlson versus Harris, and that was from 2004. A trial court acts within the bounds of its discretion when it, 1, correctly perceived the issue as one of discretion, 2, acted within the outer boundaries of its discretion, 3, acted consistently with the legal standards applicable to the specific choices available to it, and 4, reached its decision by the exercise of reason. And that's from Lundborg versus My Fun Life. And that was from 2018. The judge goes later on to state the seminal Idaho case on the admissibility of alternative perpetrator evidence is Meister supra prior to Meister. A defendant wishing to present such evidence at trial had to first present proof of connection with the crime, such a train of facts or circumstances as tend clearly to point out someone besides the accused as the guilty party, remote acts disconnected and outside of the crime itself cannot be separately proved for such a purpose. State versus Larson from 1966 in the state of Idaho. Meister clarified that the Idaho rules of evidence, rather than the more erroneous Larson standard, uh, control alternative perpetrator evidence admissibility. Under these rules, evidence is relevant if it has any tendency to make the existence of any fact is or of consequence to the determination of the action more probable or less probable than it would be without the evidence. State versus Garcia, 2020. Idaho Rule of Evidence governs the exclusion of relevant evidence and permits a court to exclude evidence if its probative value is substantially outweighed by a danger of unfair prejudice, confusing the issues, misleading the jury, undue delay, wasting time, or needlessly presenting cumulative evidence. Here is the evidence the defendant has offered, purporting to establish the four individuals as alternate perpetrators, objectively fails to meet the Meister standard. Namely, the evidence is entirely irrelevant. Nothing links to these individuals to the homicides or otherwise gives rise to reasonable inference that they committed the crime indeed. It would take nothing short of rank speculation by the jury to make such a finding. Basically, what he's saying here is these alternate perps that the defense has brought forward would be speculation in the eyes of the jury. That's what he's trying to say there. He doesn't want the jury to speculate over something that he, the judge, deems false or doesn't have any merit. Three of the individuals were socially connected to one or more of the victims, interacted with one or more of the victims at social events in the hours prior to the homicide. It's redacted. Lived within walking distance of the crime scene and were familiar with the layout of the victim's home from prior social events. While perhaps this evidence could suggest an opportunity to commit the crime, which no doubt is an opportunity shared by dozens of others in the victim's social circles, there is no compelling evidence that any of them had a motive to kill the victims, much less physically harm them, or a means to do so. Further, there is no evidence connecting them to the crime scene. They have each cooperated with law enforcement, providing DNA samples, fingerprints, and allowing searches as requested. Notably, lab testing has excluded their DNA from samples taken from the crime scene and victims. Okay, back that part up right there. DNA samples taken from the crime scene and the victims. So this takes me back to this one point. Could there have been DNA from the perp underneath the fingernails of one of the victims? Now, if we remember what happened to Xana Kernodle, she fought back very fiercely, grabbing the knife and grabbing the blade of the knife to where her fingers were nearly severed. Could she have got the perpetrator's DNA underneath her fingernails? Or could the perpetrator have cut himself during the stabbing and some of his blood, gravity bleeding, have landed on one of the victims, say their clothes, or maybe mixed in with their blood? We'll never know. The fourth individual did not know the victims, but he had a passing connection to one of them. While noticing her shopping at a store approximately 5 weeks prior to the homicides, he followed her briefly out of the exit of the store while considering approaching her to talk. Now, this could have possibly been Kaylee, because we've heard that she was being stalked. Well, maybe she wasn't being stalked. Maybe this guy saw her, thought she was pretty, and decided to follow her out of the store so he could muster up the courage to talk to her. Because we've all heard what that one store owner said, that they had told him she had a stalker. I don't think she had a stalker. I think that it coincides with this gentleman right here following her out of the store so he could muster the courage up to talk to her, maybe ask her on a date, because at this time she was single because she had broken up with Jack Decor. He turned away before ever speaking to her. The event was captured on surveillance camera. This individual subsequently cooperated with law enforcement, providing his phone number and a DNA sample. As with the other alleged alternative perpetrators, live reports excluded his DNA from the samples taken from the crime scene and victims. And there is no evidence connecting him to the crime scene. So they say it here again. Samples taken from the crime scene and victims. And I'm going to go back again. The perpetrator must either cut himself and his blood got mixed in with the blood of the victims, or his DNA got underneath the fingernails and maybe Xana, or who knows, it could have been all four of them. And they did find that blood on the banister, going either going down the stairs or maybe going up the stairs. But when they say it here twice, samples taken from the crime scene of the victims, it makes you wonder which victim, if not all victims, either had the perpetrator's blood mixed in with their own blood, or if his DNA was underneath their fingernails. Collectively, defendants proffer with regarding to these four individuals fails to give rise to even a inference that they committed the crimes or otherwise make it more or less likely that defendant was the perpetrator. Therefore, it is irrelevant under IRE 401. Defendant has provided no probative, admissible, significant evidence or of motive, ill feelings, means, presence at the scene, or any other connection to the crime that could possibly move the ball to the extent it supports an alternate perpetrator theory. At best, defendants' offer of proof can give rise to only wild speculation that it is possible any one of these four individuals could have committed the crimes, which is inadequate under Meister. Again, mere inference that another person could have committed the crime will most likely not be relevant. Meister, 148 Idaho at 241, 220, and P3D at 1060. In other words, it is not sufficient for a defendant to merely offer up unsupported speculation that another person may have committed the crime, which is all defendant has done here. So he's basically, the judge here is basically shooting down the idea that no one else but Brian did this. That's coming out of the judge's mouth. That's not coming out of my mouth. Even if there was a shred of probative value in the proffered evidence beyond wild speculation, it is excluded by IRE 403, as the 10th Circuit noted regarding alternate perpetrator evidence. It is not sufficient for a defendant merely to offer up unsupported speculation that another person may have done the crime. Such speculative blaming intensifies the grave risk of jury confusion, and it invites the jury to render its findings based on emotion or prejudice. Likewise, here presentation of the proffered alternative perpetrator evidence would pose a great threat of confusing the issues because it would force the state to defend against a nebulous allegation that perhaps these individuals were involved. This foray would lead the jury astray, turning its focus away from whether defendant, the only person whose actions are on trial, committed the charged crimes. It would also prevent a threat of unfair prejudice, and it would also invite the jury to blame unprecedented persons for a heinous crime when there's not a scintilla of competent evidence connecting them to the crime. Finally, it would do nothing more than waste the precious time of the jury and the court in what is already scheduled a 3-month trial. Nonetheless, the court's ruling does not preclude defendant from confronting and cross-examining the state's law enforcement witnesses regarding the thoroughness of the investigation, particularly in following up on ruling out leads generally. Indeed, the Idaho Court of Appeals recently found in an unpublished opinion that questioning a detective about failing to follow up on another plausible lead was relevant to alternative perpetrator analysis. We agree with Emerson that a relevant line of inquiry would be to question the scope and the breadth of the investigation and to explore on cross-examination whether plausible investigative leads about third parties were ignored or overlooked. It further stated that this line of questioning may include inquiries about the investigation or specific third parties absent satisfying Meister, noting while evidence challenging the thoroughness and reliability of the investigation might be probative, questioning whether law enforcement investigated specific individuals with no connection to the murder, provided no probative evidence. Moreover, with no connection between the evidence and the crime, there is no explanation of justification for the questioning. It would not help the jury answer the only question in the case, whether Emerson killed James. The court will apply the same parameters at trial regarding defendant's cross-examination of law enforcement. It may inquire as to the reasonableness of the investigation, including investigating and ruling out other leads. He is not, however, permitted to question law enforcement about the investigation of any specific individual as a potential alternate perpetrator without first raising the matter with the court outside the jury's presence. Basically, it sounds like he's allowing them to cross-examine the state's law enforcement witnesses about an alternate perpetrator, but at the same time, he's tying Ann Taylor's hands. She can only ask certain questions at certain times. She cannot ask about the investigation or anything like that. It just feels like he's trying to kneecap Ann Taylor on that point, but he is giving them discretion on who they basically testify, cross-examine. He's letting them do that, but he don't want them to go into wild conspiracy theories. Or at least that's how he's putting it. He says it's speculation, and he doesn't want them to confuse the jury. Well, pretty much the 11th of July, there is a new docuseries coming out on Prime Video. So if he's worried about them confusing the jury, this new docuseries pretty much will poison the jury pool, because this new docuseries totally buries Brian. It's got Emily Allant in it. It's got Hunter Johnson in it, plus a few other people. The trial, I believe, will start either August 11th or August 18th. It's going to be a pretty wild trial. But I hope everyone has a good Saturday. And this is True Crime Unleashed. I'm out.